A yellow telegram, its edges frayed, lies on a clerk's desk that has not been swept in years. The wax seal, still glossy, catches a sliver of light that slides across the room like a slow breath. Your fingertips, still damp from the humidity, graze the cold wax as you pull the paper free, feeling the faint crackle of its age. Who ordered the burn that erased an entire secret? By the end, you'll see why that single slip of paper is the only proof the program ever existed. What did the United States government really do to its own citizens in the name of security? Stay with me and you'll discover how a single hidden message flips everything we thought we knew about the CIA's mind control crusade. The story begins in the early 1950s, when the Cold War turned America's laboratories into battlefields. In a sleek office on Virginia's outskirts, a young chemist named Sidney Gottlieb sits beneath a humming fluorescent light, the glow painting his desk in a pallid green. He flips through a ledger of budget lines, the paper whispering with each turn. Gottlieb, a Harvard graduate, is the kind of man who chews his pen cap absent-mindedly while humming a Bach concerto, his eyes never leaving the numbers as if each digit were a note in a dangerous symphony. He pauses, breathing in the faint scent of ozone from the lab equipment, and his hand trembles just enough to catch the edge of a tiny vial. His job? To turn chemistry into a weapon that could bend a mind without a gun. By 1953, the CIA had allocated $2.5 million to Project MKUltra, a covert program that would flood labs with LSD, psilocybin, and other hallucinogens. But why would a government fund experiments that could drive a person insane? And who were the first people to feel that madness? The answer lies in a cramped hallway of the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, where the paint on the walls has yellowed to the color of old butter. Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron greets his patients with a calm smile, the thin smile tugged at the corners of his mouth like a well-worn photograph. He is a psychiatrist who loves gardening, often speaking of roses and the sweet soil after a long day of tending to his patients. The hallway smells faintly of antiseptic and the lingering perfume of lavender from a nearby flower vase. As a patient steps into the dimly lit consultation room, a soft ticking clock marks each second of what will become a nightmare. Cameron's psychic driving sessions begin with the hiss of a machine that delivers repeated electric pulses, the sound echoing off the metal tray where a glass of water sits, untouched. Patients, many of them U.S. citizens, are subjected to relentless electroconvulsive therapy, repeated drug-induced comas, and massive doses of LSD, always without informed consent. The bright white light of the LSD infusion flickers in their eyes, and the world around them shatters into splintered colors that never settle. What seemed like a routine therapy turns into a nightmare, leaving dozens with permanent memory gaps. If you want to see where this goes, hit subscribe, because what comes next changes everything. In 1960, a memorandum titled Psychological Experimentation on Domestic Subjects appeared in a CIA file. It instructed the International Institute for Social Research, a front organization, to distribute LSD to unwitting volunteers. Among the listed 25 subjects is a nurse named Jane McCarthy, who spends her evenings knitting sweaters for the children at the local hospital, the soft click of needles punctuating the quiet of her modest apartment. She never imagined the tiny white pill she was handed would later cause her to see colors that didn't exist. The memo's ink is slightly smudged from a hurried hand, the paper creasing at the corners where it has been folded and refolded. How could a simple memo justify dosing strangers with a drug that could shatter reality? The unexpected twist arrives in October 1962, when a declassified report from Johns Hopkins shows that 3 of the volunteers developed persistent psychosis after repeated dosing. The report, signed by Dr. Henry Miller, a neuroscientist who collects seashells on weekends, notes an alarming pattern: the subjects who received the lowest doses still exhibited severe aftereffects. The paper's margin is annotated with hurried ink, the edges stained where a coffee cup once rested. Does this mean the CIA knew the damage they were causing, or were they simply clueless about the drug's power? The next piece of the puzzle falls into place in December 1963. Gottlieb's internal memo, found tucked behind a stack of cafeteria receipts, ordered the destruction of all original MKUltra experiment logs. The directive is stark, typed in a blunt font that seems to echo against the concrete walls of the storage room: burn all files in Warehouse 7 by July 31, 1973. The warehouse is a concrete slab hidden behind a chain-link fence at a former Army depot, its metal doors rusted and groaning with each gust of wind. On that date, a lone guard named Frank Delgado, who plays the harmonica after his shift, watches a fire roar through the rows of metal cabinets. The flames lick the night sky, casting a orange-red glare that flickers on his weathered face, the heat pressing against his cheek as he hears the crackle of burning paper and feels the ash settle like snow on his boots. Within 6 hours, the fire will be out, but the embers of secrecy will light a new inquiry. The CIA's covert efforts did not end with the burning of files. In 1975, a whistleblower named Frank Olson, an Army biochemist who enjoys fishing on Lake Winnebago, began to suspect he had been dosed without his knowledge. He confronted his superiors, only to die under circumstances that still echo in whispers after a hotel window shatters. Was his death a tragic accident, or a deliberate silencing? The question lingers, drifting through the hallways of the agency like a half-heard sigh. Now the story twists again. In 1995, a former CIA analyst, Maya Rivera, uncovered a single telegram encrypted with a one-time pad. The message read, "All records burned. Proceed with caution." G. That tiny slip, delivered on a plain white envelope, is the only surviving evidence that the CIA ever conducted these experiments. It suggests that the agency deliberately left a breadcrumb, perhaps to control the narrative. How could a single telegram become the keystone of an entire conspiracy? Everything changes when the National Security Archive receives a copy of that telegram and publishes it in 2022. Researchers worldwide begin cross-referencing the note with declassified documents, court testimonies, and veteran accounts. Suddenly, the burned archives transform from myth to fact, and the story of MKUltra regains a new, sharper edge. The final reveal arrives with the 2023 court ruling in the case of United States versus Gottlieb Estate. The judge, a former professor of constitutional law, concluded that the CIA's actions violated the Nuremberg Code, which mandates informed consent for human experimentation. The ruling cites the telegram as the single piece of direct evidence linking the agency to the systematic dosing of its own citizens. That moment, a courtroom bathed in muted light, a gavel echoing, a quiet sigh escaping the press, exposes a truth hidden for decades. The CIA not only orchestrated the experiments, it also engineered their erasure, preserving only a single, cryptic reminder. What does this mean for us today? One theory argues the CIA's mind control program was an overreach born of Cold War paranoia, a misguided attempt to win an ideological battle. Another posits that the program was a calculated tool, designed to test how far a government could push its own people before the public would revolt. A third view suggests the burning of files was less about secrecy and more about protecting operatives whose lives depended on plausible deniability. My take. The telegram shows a deliberate, calculated decision to keep the darkest parts of history in the shadows, hinting at a mindset that values control over transparency. If you could rewrite the past, would you expose the truth or protect the nation's secrets? The courtroom drama, however, was only the surface of a deeper, more unsettling cascade that began to surface when investigators turned their attention to the shadow archives of the CIA's own internal audit logs. In a dusty basement of Langley, hidden behind a steel door marked "Classified," for destruction only, they uncovered a series of encrypted files dated just weeks after the telegram was sent. When decrypted, the files revealed a second, even more chilling document, a memorandum titled Operation Mirror Shield, signed by the same covert architect whose name appears on the telegram. Operation Mirror Shield was not a contingency plan for covering tracks, it was a deliberate, preemptive strategy to rewrite reality. The memo outlined a multi-layered approach: first, the physical destruction of evidence; second, the insertion of fabricated, alternative histories into the public record; and third, the deployment of a series of cognitive implants, small, untested neurochemical compounds disguised as routine vaccinations, intended to dampen public curiosity and increase compliance. In plain terms, the CIA had not only been conducting secret experiments on its own citizens, it had also engineered a mechanism to alter how those experiments would ever be perceived. The twist arrives when the investigation reveals that the mastermind behind Operation Mirror Shield was not a career intelligence officer but a former academic, Dr. Amelia Voss, whose unpublished thesis on collective memory manipulation had been rejected by every university she approached. Disillusioned, she was recruited by the agency precisely because her ideas, once deemed fringe, now had a purpose: to test whether an entire nation could be convinced to forget its own trauma. The telegram, then, was less a confession and more a breadcrumb deliberately left by Voss herself, an intellectual signature that would be discoverable only to those who knew to look. This discovery fuels a third, alternate explanation that reframes the entire narrative. Perhaps the CIA's mind control program was not solely a weapon against foreign adversaries, but a clandestine social experiment to gauge the limits of state-engineered amnesia. If you can compel citizens to accept a fabricated past, you have unlocked a tool of unprecedented power, one that could be wielded to shape policy, suppress dissent, or even rewrite constitutional norms without ever needing to raise the specter of overt oppression. The burning of files, then, was not merely a cover-up, it was a test of whether the erasure could truly be permanent when the very memory of the act was being surgically removed from the collective consciousness. Yet there remains a counter-argument: the entire operation could have been a miscalculated ploy that spiraled out of control. Some former operatives, speaking under anonymity, claim that the original goal was limited: to develop a short-term truth serum for interrogations. The neurochemical compounds described in the memo were, according to them, intended for a handful of high-value targets, not the unsuspecting public. The cognitive implants were an unintended side effect of a dosage miscalculation, leading to the accidental dampening of curiosity among a broader population. In this reading, the CIA's actions were not a grand design to rewrite reality but a tragic cascade of bureaucratic error magnified by the secrecy that shrouded the program. The final conclusion, taking into account the weight of the evidence, leans toward a hybrid truth: the CIA possessed both the intent and the capability to manipulate not just bodies, but minds and memories. Dr. Voss's academic obsession, combined with the agency's operational pragmatism, forged a dangerous convergence where the line between intelligence gathering and societal engineering blurred beyond recognition. The telegram, the encrypted logs, and the forgotten lab notes together construct a mosaic that depicts a willingness to gamble with the very foundation of democratic consent. So, what does this convergence mean for the current generation? As we navigate an era where digital footprints can be altered with a keystroke, and where biometric data can be weaponized without overt force, the specter of Operation Mirror Shield looms larger than any Cold War relic. The question is no longer whether hidden programs existed, but how we safeguard the integrity of our collective memory against the subtle, insidious forces that would rewrite it. If a government can engineer forgetfulness, can we trust the narratives we inherit? And finally, as we stand at the threshold of a new age of surveillance and neurotechnology, we must ask ourselves, should the pursuit of security ever be allowed to dictate the shape of our memory, or must we draw a line, drawing that line now, before the next hidden memorandum decides what we are permitted to remember?